Well, it's Memorial Day, ladies and gentlemen. It was 1 month today that I launched this channel. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know where it would go. I knew that day I was heading up to the Twin Cities to go to the governor's mansion and the protest and the rally there, knowing that I wanted to interview people about how they had been impacted by the governor's draconian and despotic measures. In that 1 month, I have met a large amount of patriots. Everyone from Tara and Erica. It was Tara's first time ever going to a rally or a protest of any kind. Subsequently, Tara has become a friend, as well as Erica. But Tara has also become a very vocal, very vocal proponent of freeing the states. She's also wrestled with some hard issues in her own family, as far as how this has impacted her own home and her children. I've met two politicians, one currently sitting in office who is a patriot and has a desire to see the right thing done for the people of the state of Minnesota. Another one is running for office, challenging the incumbent, seeking to, for lack of better terminology, bring some stability to his district in a way that most people wouldn't understand because they haven't sat through the things that he's experienced in his district. I've met just dozens and dozens and dozens of people in a 1 month period. But all that aside, as I record this and as we think about everything that's, how do I want to say this? Everything that's taken place since the 17th of March, on the middle of March, when Governor Walz decided that he was going to shut the state down. There's been a lot of stuff that's been missed. And on Memorial Day, the thing that really comes home to me at this time is how the people who we remember on Memorial Day, the men and women who were ordered to war, many of them volunteered, but also many of them drafted, but ordered to war by the very government that now is infringing on the very constitutional rights, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Third Amendment, and others on down the line. That Bill of Rights, the Constitution as a whole, the very government that sent them off to war to die for the freedom, oftentimes of people of other lands, are now destroying the very freedoms that those people sought to protect for others. Nothing more than the First Amendment at this point in time is under assault the way the First Amendment is. The First Amendment is being attacked on all fronts. It's not just churches, but just the freedom to assemble. We're seeing over and over again as people are being, across the United States, are being run out of public places, moms being arrested in public parks, dads being arrested in public parks, people being arrested for paddleboarding in the open water. Reports have come in of people being harassed by officials in the state of Minnesota. Uh, Phone calls are being made to local law enforcement about parties, about get-togethers on private property and in public places. And yes, places of worship, churches, religious gatherings are being attacked. Now, not in a physical sense, in where people are going in and doing them harm. That is happening in some places within within the United States. But we have mayors, like the mayor of New Brighton, Minnesota, who is threatening the use of force, and I've said this numerous times, and I'll say it here again. When you threaten to send law enforcement to a place to shut it down for not following the governor's arbitrary mandates, the only way that you can gain compliance to that is through the threat of force. People don't willingly comply with things that fly against their nature and violate their rights without knowing that force can be brought to bear on them, that they can be hauled off to jail in handcuffs, that they can be imprisoned for exercising the most foundational and fundamental of all rights, which is the freedom to assemble and the freedom to worship in a way that they believe they are supposed to according to their religion. That would cause the men and women who have died in service to this country to roll over in their graves if they knew what was happening. I have a friend that I've made. She's a citizen journalist. Her name's Teresa. She runs Mill City Citizens. I know I screwed that up, but she shot video today of men and women, veterans and others, who gathered at the federal cemetery at Fort Snelling to place flags that they purchased at their expense on the graves of those who died in service to their country, because our country wouldn't take the time to do that. So these private individuals stood up to remember those who have gone before us, those on whose shoulders we stand, who have carried us on their backs in times of war and hostility, who have given their lives to protect us from enemies from without. These very people who died in service to our freedoms, who died because others have ordered them into places of hostility, could not be honored on the one day out of the year that we are supposed to honor them. Now, as a Christian, there are a lot of holidays that I don't recognize. There are a lot of things that I don't get as wrapped up tight about as others do. But as a Christian, I do often think, and as a veteran, I do often think of those who have gone before me. And those who are serving now since I have served, who have given up their lives, have given life and liberty, given limb, sometimes numerous limbs, to the cause of the defense of freedom and liberty across the world. And that doesn't mean I've agreed with every single action that this United States has taken. And so I want us to think, how do we get to this point where at the same time we're told to be patriotic and do what the government, what the state says we should do, and at the same time the state, the federal government, and the local government, no one's taking the time to honor the fallen who have helped keep them in power? And as I said, make no mistake, those men and women would be rolling over in their graves if they saw the abuse that's being heaped upon the American people by the hands of despotic little tyrants in little places like New Brighton, Minnesota, or from the capital of the state of Minnesota, St. Paul, where the governor rules by fiat and his lackeys in the House of Representatives just keep endorsing everything that he does. While true patriots, some from within the House and others in the Senate, have risen up and done what they could only to be rebuffed. It's a sad time for the American people, and it's a especially sad time for the people in the state of Minnesota who have had every tiny little aspect of their freedom micromanaged by a governor who claims he's doing it out of compassion and desire to protect us. But protect us from what, Governor? Who's going to protect us from you? Who's going to protect us from Keith Ellison? Who's a man who everybody knows beat his significant other? We all know that. Who's going to protect us from despots like Valerie Johnson in New Brighton? Who's going to protect us from the loss of the economic boon that we were experiencing, Mr. Governor? Who do we listen to when, at the federal level, the executive branch has said houses of worship are essential and governors need to remove all restrictions right now? Who do we listen to? Do we listen to him? Or do we listen to you, Governor? Whose authority wins out in this situation? And if it's your authority, Mr. Governor, why do you get to determine what is good and proper worship for any individual? Why can you restrict singing, which would be the free exercise of religion? But yet, abortion is still legal and still taking place? That's essential? And that's for the good of the public? Mr. Governor, you are a despot. And according to the Constitution and according to the Bible, you're to do, in Romans 13, 1 through 7, you are to reward those that do good and punish those that do evil. And right now, Mr. Governor, you're punishing those that do good. You're punishing those who would seek to worship God together in their local churches. And yes, even in mosques and synagogues and other places. Mr. Governor, you have overstepped your bounds. And on this Memorial Day, Mr. Governor, I call on you to remove those restrictions. I call on you to do what God has commanded you to do in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7, and step out of the way of Christians especially, so that they may worship the way God has commanded us to do. There was no internet, online streaming for churches back then. Now, a lot could be said about pastors and elders and local Christians being willing to stand up and do what they're being forbidden to do right now. But sadly, that's not where the church is at this point in time in the United States, especially in the state of Minnesota. But, Mr. Governor, you've overstepped. God is not going to look favorably on you for what you have done. And I know the argument can be made, well, you care more about your freedom to go to church. You care more about the economy. You don't care if people die. Mr. Governor, I care more about my neighbor than you do. And I know people that are struggling with depression. I know people that are struggling with anxiety. Not because they're afraid they're going to get sick or that a family member is going to get sick and die, but, Mr. Governor, because their source of stability is their religious gathering. The in-person contact of being with the local body. Mr. Governor, you are doing things that you are not allowed to do. And it's time that you relinquished those powers. Powers you should have never taken to yourself. I'm calling on you to do this in the name of all who have gone out and died for their country, who have died for the liberty of the world, but especially for the people of the United States, Mr. Governor. You are making mockery of that sacrifice. As our freedoms continue to be eroded and stripped from us, as we approach the coming of the celebration of the birth of this nation, and places all over the state of Minnesota are canceling celebrations for the 4th of July. That's the irony. One day out of the year we remember those who have died in service to this nation. And on another day we remember the birth of this nation, which has given rise to that patriotic and an independent verve with which this nation has grown, and that men and women have served with tenacity, with guts and grit and drive to go into places like Europe and Asia and free those places from tyrants, to free those places from suffering. And those two holidays have been made nil by your actions. Mr. Governor, you are betraying your people. And you have betrayed the God who has placed you in a position of authority. You are not ruling with justice. You are ruling as a tyrant. And you are punishing those that do good. And you are failing to remember those that have gone before you. And as a veteran, Mr. Governor, that, above anything, should cut you quickly and deeply in your heart, or whatever's left of it. Have you not ruined enough lives in this state? For what? For bad models that aren't paying out? Shame on you, Governor Walz. End these restrictions. Let us get back to being Americans. As always, thanks for watching the video. Thanks for being open-minded. Thanks for listening. I would ask that over here in the corner, somewhere on your screen, you hit the subscribe button. It's important, not for me, but because mainstream media, legacy media, isn't going to get the word out. They're not going to let people who don't toe the established line speak. So for the sake of liberty and for the sake of the defense of this nation, small little independent voices like mine need to be heard, especially the interviews. It's got very little to do with my commentary and a lot more to do with the interviews and the people who are affected when liberties are tread on. So once again, hit the subscribe button, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.